What is up, people? Welcome back to a brand new video, and we are back. I know I've been gone a little bit, like 90 days, geez, but we are back. Sammy Talks Politics Season 2. I just came up with that. Look at that beautiful new profile picture, that shiny, new, pristine banner, and these beautiful new thumbnails. I've been spending way too much time on Photoshop instead of actually recording videos, but we are back with better videos, more nonpartisan videos, just more quality uploads, and maybe even, more consistent uploads. I don't know, it might be tough, but I figured might as well get started by updating my midterm predictions, since a lot of stuff has changed since my original ones all the way back like multiple months ago. But I actually haven't even made a House prediction, so I thought, might as well start with that. And the House gets often ignored. There's too many seats. It's often seen as more unimportant compared to the Senate. It's the lower chamber. But in fact, it's actually super important. Like we just saw a few days ago, the House voted on Trump's big, beautiful bill. And if the House had gone a different way in 2024, he would have had to seriously amend the big, beautiful bill, before sending it over to Congress. And the way that the House goes in 2026 will seriously determine Trump's legislative agenda going into the last 2 years of his administration. So with these 435 House seats, only about 60 are really worth discussing. So we're going to be going state by state, East Coast to West Coast, Maine to Alaska, just going through and discussing these House races and my thoughts on them and my prediction. The Democrats are starting at 186 House seats. The Republicans are starting at 189. You need 218 to secure a majority. And I should add that I'm expecting the national environment to be around D+4 to D+5, which is around half of the blue wave we saw in 2018 and a lot closer to the blue wave we saw in around 2020. And let's get started with Maine. So the incumbent here is Jared Golden. He's a Democrat. This is a Trump +9 seat. And his opponent is Paul LePage, who's actually a very bad candidate, all things considered. And, he was the former governor, but he's just very hated. He lost to Janet Mills like a few years ago by a lot when he tried to run for governor again. And Jared Golden is very well liked. He's been down a lot in polls recently, but I think that's just polls underestimating him and his coalition. I think he's going to secure re-election pretty easily, and I'm going to mark this as lean D. Now, moving on to Long Island. There's these two seats, New York's 3rd and New York's 4th. These are held by Laura Gillen in the South and Tom Suozzi in the North. And Tom Suozzi's seat is a Trump +1 seat. Laura Gillen's seat is a Harris +3 seat. Both of these are trending very Republican. However, I just don't think they're going to flip yet. Now, a lot of people are saying Zoran's mayorship might cause these to trend Republican off a cliff and, might make them flip in 2026. And although I think they could flip in something like 2028, I just don't really think they flip in 2026, because even if Zoran's mayorship goes bad, which that's up for debate in itself, although they don't really like the term socialist, and these two counties with like Nassau County and stuff, they won't like Zoran's mayorship, all things considered, they're still probably not going to flip, because Laura Gillen and Tom Suozzi have distanced themselves from Zoran. So even if his mayorship goes bad or he's hated or something like that, they should be fine. All things considered, I think they're both lean D races. Laura Gillen's being a bit better than Tom Suozzi's, but I think they're both lean D. Now moving upstate, you have Mike Lawler's seat in New York 17th, and you've got Josh Riley's seat up here. Both of these are Harris +1 seats. Both of these are trending right a lot less than, something down here in like New York City. And let's just get started with Mike Lawler's seat. Now, he might run for governor in 2026 and try and oust Kathy Hochul, but for now, I don't really think he does, and I think he runs for re-election in the seat. And he's actually a massive outperformer in this seat. It's a Harris +1 seat. He won by like 6 in 2024, even though his opponent was actually pretty weak. But for now, I do think he wins re-election if he does go for it, and I'm going to mark this, not Connecticut, I'm going to mark this as lean Republican. And finally, for the final New York seat, we have Josh Riley's seat, Harris +1. The New York trends that we've been seeing in the South aren't really going to affect Josh Riley, and he beat Mark Molinaro in 2024 by a pretty decent margin, flipping the seat, and I think it's going to stay Democratic, staying at a lean D margin at around like D+4. And I should mention, for all of New York, I expect it to be to the right of the nation by a little bit, just because you have Kathy Hochul up for re-election, and she's probably going to underperform, a lot of the performances you see from Democrats a lot of the time in New York. But my estimations of Kathy Hochul have actually gotten a lot better recently, where, you've got Mike Lawler, who's seeming like he's not going to run for governor, and it's going to be more someone like Elise Stefanik who's going to do worse. And, she's just been doing better with favorables. She's, become a better politician as she's, had more time in the governor's office. And I think she'll do decent in her governor's race, but it's still an underperformance, and it's making me think that, Democrats are not going to do that well in New York in 2026, but still do fine. Now moving on to New Jersey. So in New Jersey, you've got New Jersey's 7th and you've got New Jersey's 9th. In New Jersey's 9th, it was a massive shock that Trump won this district. This is part of like the Newark area, which was like super heavily minority, which like swung to Trump by a massive margin. You know, Biden won this seat. What? Biden won this seat by like, I don't know, 15 or something. And then Trump won it by 1. And the Democratic incumbent here, Nellie Powell, hung on by around like 5 points. I expect her to hold on by a similar margin in 2026, but don't be surprised if it's shockingly close like it was in 2024. And then here we've got New Jersey's 7th. Tom Keene is running for re-election. He won by 5 in 2024, outperforming Trump. And although his opponent is going to be a lot better this time, or at least that's what it's looking like, Rebecca Bennett, the Keene name is still very big in New Jersey, and I still think he's going to hold on to re-election by just a little bit, although this should be a very big offensive focus for Democrats come 2026. And now moving on to Pennsylvania, there are 4 competitive districts here. Starting off in Pennsylvania's first, you got Brian Fitzpatrick. He is a very strong incumbent as a Republican. This is a Harris district, but he managed to win re-election by 13 in 2024. I expect him to win re-election by around like 10 points in 2026. Now moving on to Scott Perry's district. This is Pennsylvania's 10th, and he's kind of cooked. This is a Trump plus 5 district, but he only managed to win re-election by around 1 in 2024, and that was in a massive red wave for Pennsylvania Republicans. And in 2026, which is looking like a much better year for Pennsylvania Democrats, I think he's cooked, especially with his same opponent from 2024, who was super good, going against him this time as well. I think he's pretty cooked. D+3 to D+4. He's like basically dead on arrival. Then you got Pennsylvania's 7th and Pennsylvania's 8th. Both these are in like northeast Pennsylvania. It's a region that's been trending to the right very fast. It's more working class. And they both swung to Trump by a lot in 2024, knocking off their very strong incumbent Democrats. Here, starting off, we got Pennsylvania's 9th. This was held by Matt Cartwright until 2024, when it went to Rob Buchanan, where he won by 1.6. And I expect him to hold on by a bit less than 5, like Buchanan plus like 4 or something, come 2026, especially because Matt Cartwright declined. And then moving on to Pennsylvania's 7th, this is a Trump plus 3 district. It's held by Ryan McKenzie, who's a lot weaker. Now, the previous Democrat, Susan Wild, has also declined, but the Democrats do have a pretty strong nominee in Lamont McClure. He's probably going to be the nominee, who is the Northampton County executive, and I expect him to win the seat by around 2 to 3 points. This is definitely a key spot of the Democratic pathway to 218 seats alongside Pennsylvania's 10th, so both of these are flips. I should say I expect Pennsylvania Democrats to do very well, in kind of like a reverse New York where they do better than the nation, because I expect Josh Shapiro to win re-election by a very, very, very large margin. Now moving on to Virginia, we have 4 competitive districts here, starting off in the north with Suhas Subramanian in Virginia's 10th. He underperformed a lot of expectations, only winning by 4 in 2024, and I do expect him to do a bit better here and win by a bit more, kind of like D+6-ish, maybe D+7. Then a bit lower, we have Eugene Vindman, who won by 2.6 points in 2024. I expect him to barely win by likely come 2026. Now moving on to Virginia's 1st. This is an area that's actually been trending to the left pretty fast, although I do still think, you know, it's still going to be pretty Republican. The Republican incumbent is very strong. He won by 13, where Trump only won this district by 5, and I do think he's going to win re-election by around 10, kind of like Brian Fitzpatrick in Pennsylvania. And the final competitive district in Virginia is Virginia's 2nd. This is one that's held by Jen Kiggans, who is a Republican who won the seat back in 2022, and I don't think she's going to win re-election, actually. I think this is going to be a flip for Democrats. You got a lot of government jobs in Virginia, which have been impacted a lot by the Doge cuts. And, you know, overall, I expect a much bluer environment. She's a pretty weak candidate. And right now, the Democratic frontrunner is Pamela Northam, who is the First Lady of Virginia. But you also have someone strong like Aaron Rouse, who could run, who was trying to run for, I believe, Lieutenant Governor this year. And if he does run, that puts her in an even worse spot. But for now, I'm going to keep it at around like D+2 to D+3. Now moving on to North Carolina's 1st, you have Don Davis, who's up for re-election. He is a Democrat. He won by, I believe, like a lean margin in 2024. And I'm going to keep it at that for 2026 because he has to rely on a lot of rural minority turnout, specifically black voters in the black belt, which is very hard to maintain in a midterm year. So I think although it's going to be a blue wave year, I still think he's going to win by a bit of a smaller margin than you might expect for a blue wave come 2026, around like a D+4 margin. And now moving on to Florida, you have 2 competitive districts. First of all, in Miami, you have Jared Moskowitz, who represents a Harris plus 2 district. This could be a very strong offensive opportunity for Republicans, especially come 2028, when it's a much more neutral environment. But for now, I do still think he wins re-election by a lean margin, although the area is trending Republican very, very fast. Then in Florida's 13th, you have Anna Paulina Luna. She is in a Trump plus 13 district, and she won by 9.6 in 2024. And I expect her to win by a bit of a smaller margin come 2026, but still a pretty strong margin of around like 7 to 8 points. So I'm going to mark it as likely R. Now moving all the way over to the Rust Belt in Ohio, we have 3 competitive districts here. I marked the wrong one, my bad. These are the 3 competitive districts. We have Greg Landsman, Marcy Kaptur, and Amelia Sykes here, all 3 Democrats representing, formerly competitive districts, but there is going to be some type of redistricting in Ohio come 2026, and this is how I think it'll shake out. So I think Greg Landsman's district is actually going to get packed, so it becomes a safe Democratic district instead of a likely one. And then if you go to the north here, Marcy Kaptur, she won in I believe a Trump plus 7 district, which is ridiculous. She's a very strong incumbent, but I think she's going to retire because her district is very easy to make super Republican, and I think that's what Republicans are going to do, so I think she's just going to retire anyway, and I'm going to mark it as likely R. Now, for Amelia Sykes, it could be different. I've heard rumors she has some type of connection, at the people who are doing redistricting, so it could be more favorable to her. They might save her, possibly. I think she has a better chance than Marcy Kaptur, but still, I don't know. I still think she's going to get redistricted, but I don't think she's gonna just retire like Marcy Kaptur did. Instead, I think she might go down with the ship, or she might go for governor or something else. So I'm gonna mark this as lean R, just in case she does, run for re-election, or keeping the door open, a little creek that maybe she does get saved by the redistricting commission. You never know. But I do think they do still try and draw her out, and she is less of an overperformer than Marcy Kaptur anyway, so I do think it's still a pretty Republican district if they try and draw her out. Now moving over to Michigan, we have 4 competitive districts here, starting off in Michigan's 4th with Bill Huizenga. He won by 11 points in 2024, however, it's only a Trump plus 5 district, so it could be lean, with him retiring to try and go for governor, but still, actually he might be going for senator, I kind of forgot. But he's going to be retiring most likely, and if he does, I think it could go to lean and maybe even flip in a massive blue wave, just because you don't have that strong incumbent on the ticket. But for now, I'm going to mark it as likely R, R plus 7, maybe R plus 6, just because it's still a Trump plus 5 district. So actually, you know what? I think it'll be R plus 5, but still barely on the likely side. Because it's still a Trump plus 5 district, I don't really think it gets that close. Democrats could try and invest here and maybe try and get something to work out. You never know. Then you've got Michigan's 8th up here with Kirsten McDonald-Riverett. She won by a pretty decent margin in 2024, around 6 points, and I think she does a bit better than that come 2026, but still around that same margin, around 7 to 8. Her opponent was pretty weak in 2024. Now moving to Michigan's 7th and Michigan's 10th, and these are the 2 districts in Michigan that I feel could actually flip. These are both held by Republicans. Starting off with Michigan's 10th, this one's held by John James, who is retiring to run for governor, and this is a Trump plus 7 district, which he won re-election by 6 in last year. It's very working class, it's in Macomb County, and although it was pretty close in 2022, and I feel it could flip, I feel it's still too Republican right now. Trump plus 7 is a lot, so even without the pretty strong incumbent, I still feel it's going to be held by Republicans, at least right now, although it is a pretty strong offensive opportunity for Democrats, and they should try and flip it, if they have the extra money. But for now, I do still think it's going to be around lean R, so around R plus 3. Now moving over to Michigan 7th, this is one where I think Democrats, nope. This is one where I think Democrats actually do have the edge here, and I'm going to mark it as tilt Democratic. This one's held by Tom Barrett, and it is a Trump plus 1 district, and he won by 3 against actually pretty weak Democratic nominee in Curtis Hertel. This was held by, I believe, Elisa Slotkin before she ran for Senate, and I do think it's going to flip back. Tom Barrett's a pretty weak nominee, and I think with anyone pretty decent, Democrats should be able to take him out. Now moving on to Indiana, we have 1 competitive district here. It is Indiana's 1st. It represents the, I believe, Gary, Indiana type area. It is only a Harris plus 2 or Harris plus 1 district, something like that. But it is held by a pretty strong Democratic incumbent, and although I think it could be a threat for Democrats come 2028 or 2030, I think for now it should be okay, and it's going to be around likely Democrat, D plus 5, D plus 6. And now moving into Illinois, this one's held by Eric Sorensen, who won by 9 in 2024, and I think he's going to win re-election by a bit more than that come 2026, but around that margin. like D plus 10, maybe D plus 11. Now moving on to Wisconsin, where there are two very different districts, but both of them are pretty competitive. Starting off with Wisconsin's first, which, I kind of lied. This one's actually not that competitive. I'm going to mark it as likely R. It is a Trump plus 5 district, but the incumbent, Brian Steele, won by 10 in 2024. And since it looks like the court is not going to redraw the map anytime soon, or at least not this election cycle, I'm going to keep it as likely Republican. And Brian Steele has a very bright future in Wisconsin politics. He might run for the Senate race come 2028 when Brian Johnson maybe retires. He's a very strong nominee, and I think he will win re-election by around 6 to 7 points. Now moving on to Wisconsin's third. This one is a lot more competitive. It is held by Derek Van Orden, and he is not a good nominee. This is like a Trump plus 7 district, and he only won re-election by around 3 points in 2024. His opponent in 2024 was Rebecca Cook, and she's up against him this time as well in 2026. She's a very strong candidate, very working class, very strong appeal there. And now that she has better funding compared to 2024, I think she will flip this district by around 3 to 4 points. He is pretty cooked. Speaking of cooked, Marionette Miller Meeks. Yeah, this is lean Democrat, I think. She only barely won re-election in 2024. She is a very continual underperformer. This is like a Trump plus 9 district, I think. And she only managed to win re-election by a couple hundred votes in 2024 and only managed to flip the seat by a couple hundred votes in 2020. I think she's pretty cooked, especially because it's looking like a pretty blue year in Iowa come 2026. You got Rob Sand. You've got the Senate race, which is looking not that Republican. I think she's pretty cooked, like D plus 3, D plus 4. She's in that Derek Van Orden, Scott Perry area where, yeah, she's she's pretty cooked. Now moving on to a much closer race, you have Zach Nunn running for re-election in Iowa's 3rd. So it was around this point in the video where I was talking about how Zach Nunn's a decent candidate and how he's going to make things close even in a blue year in Iowa, yada, yada, yada. But it turns out that while I'm editing the video, it came out that Zach Nunn's probably going to instead run for governor. So without incumbency in this district, I think it's actually a lean D race. Democrats have a decent candidate in the state House Minority Leader. But yeah, just throwing that out there. Editor Sammy kind of chiming in to change the prediction. Continue. And then the final Midwest seat here. Oh, I forgot about Missouri 2nd. This is pretty suburban. It's turning to the left somewhat fast. But for now, I still think it's pretty Republican. Although in a wave, it could get close or maybe even flip. But for now, I'm going to keep it as likely Republican. Yep. And now for the final Midwestern seat in Nebraska 2nd. This was looking pretty close, but then Don Bacon just retired. And now since it's like a Harris plus 5 seat, this is an auto flip. I think it's Harris plus 6 actually, but yeah, it's an auto flip. D plus 7, D plus 8. Although if Republicans do put up a pretty strong candidate, which they have options, I will say, then maybe it gets closer, and maybe even goes to lean. The current Democratic frontrunner looks like it's going to be John Kavanaugh, who's a state senator, although it could really be anyone. Now moving on to Colorado, there are 3 competitive districts here. You have Colorado's 3rd, Colorado's 4th, and Colorado's 8th. Colorado's 3rd is Trump plus 10. Jeff Hurd only won the seat by 5 in 2024 because he was up against a very strong candidate in Adam Frisch. But since he's probably not running come 2026, I'm going to mark this as likely Republican. Same goes for Lauren Boebert's district in Colorado's 4th, which is a Trump plus 17 district, but it's only a Boebert plus 11 one. I think it could get somewhat close in a blue wave just because of how bad of a candidate she is. But for now, I still think it's, likely R, maybe around R plus 7. Same goes for Jeff Hurd's district over here. And the only really competitive district here, the only one that I think could actually really flip, in a somewhat, in a pretty realistic environment, is Colorado's 8th. This one's held by Gabe Evans. It was a shocking Trump district in 2024. A lot of people were expecting it to go to Harris, because it is a very minority-heavy district. And, the minority swing, especially the Latino swing in 2024, it shocked everyone. And, Trump won this district by surprise. Gabe Evans won this district by surprise. And a lot of Gabe Evans' win was largely because of the Democratic incumbent, Yadira Caraveo, who is pretty unpopular and was, I think, abusive to her staffers or something. It's very bad. And she is actually running again for some reason. But for now, I'm just going to assume she's probably not the nominee. Although there is one primary poll between her and, the person who's closest to her, Manny Rutinel. And she is beating him, but it is an internal. So all that to say, I do think Manny Rutinel is probably the nominee just because Yadira Covero is like scandal ridden and, you know, a bad campaigner, and just she's just bad. But if she is the nominee, then I think it's like tilt Republican or maybe even lean. But assuming Manny Rutinel is the nominee, I think it's like lean Democratic, so like D+2, D+3. Although this is one of the only areas in Colorado that is trending Republican, I do still think Democrats hold it off in 2026 because of the environment and because, you know, very bad Democratic incumbent isn't on the ballot this time, probably. And moving over to Texas, we have Texas is 28th and Texas is 34th. We have Texas is 28th, which is held by Henry Cuellar, and Texas is 34th, which is held by Vicente Gonzalez. Texas is 28th is a Trump +7 district, and Henry Cuellar is going against, probably at least going against, Mayra Flores, who is a very bad Republican nominee, but he could also be going to jail as well, so that's like an extra factor. Vicente Gonzalez, we don't really know who his opponent is going to be, but the big X factor here is if these districts get redrawn, because it might. We've been hearing like murmurs about that, and if they do, they both become like likely are. And if Henry Cuellar does go to jail for like bribery or something, I don't even know, like corruption, then that becomes likely are. But if they don't get redrawn, then I think they're both like lean Democratic. I don't even know. It's a long story with these two. They could really go either way. But for now, I'm gonna have them both as like tilt Republican. Although, like, you know, if they get redrawn, and if Henry Cuellar goes to jail, and if Mayra Flores is the nominee for Henry Cuellar's district, those could all completely change the race. Both of these districts have been swinging to the right very fast. They were initially like Democratic PACs, but they just like completely changed. So there are a lot of factors to these two districts, and they could change very fast. But for now, I'm gonna have both of them as tilt Republican and both as flips. Now moving over to New Mexico's 2nd district. This was a Trump +2 district, largely because of the minority shifts we saw a lot in 2024. Gabriel Vasquez is the Democratic incumbent. He won by 4 in 2024. I expect him to win by a pretty similar margin come 2026 because he's probably going to be going against a stronger candidate, but still, it's a bluer year, so I think it's going to be around D+4. Now moving over to Montana's 1st, the incumbent is Ryan Zink, who is a pretty bad candidate. It's a Trump +11 district, but he only won by around 7 in 2024. Let's not talk about my prediction. That was, oh god, I had it as tilt D, what the hell? But I'm not going to be making that mistake again, I promise. Likely are. The Democratic frontrunner is looking pretty decent, but still, maybe in a blue wave, it could get close or maybe even flip. But, you know, for now, in like a blue leaning environment, I think it should be like around R+5, something like that. Maybe it goes down to lean, but around like likely are. Now moving over to Arizona's 1st, right here. This one's held by David Schweikart, who won by 4 in 2024 against Amish Shah, who is a pretty weak candidate. It's only a Trump +3 district, but Amish Shah is actually running again. So, and he is looking like the front runner in the Democratic primary. So I do think David Schweikart barely holds on just because the Democratic nominee is looking pretty weak. But if it's not Amish Shah, if it's someone a lot better, like it looks like Marlene Galen Woods could be pretty good, then it probably goes to like lean Democratic. But just right now, because it looks like it's going to be Amish Shah, I'm going to have it as tilt Republican. Now, moving over to Arizona's 6th, it's held by Juan Ciscomani, who won by 2 in 2024 when Trump won the district by 1. This is an area that's actually trending to the left somewhat, like at a decent pace, mainly because of Tucson, and a lot of Democrats have jumped into this race, and it's not really looking like you're gonna have a weak nominee like what's happening in Arizona's 1st. So I do think Ciscomani goes down in a pretty strong pickup for Democrats. It's around D+2 to D+3. Now moving on to Nevada. The way it's structured, with Democrats kind of gerrymandering it and Las Vegas being split 3 ways, you have 3 districts here that are always that are often pretty competitive but do lean pretty Democratic, except Nevada's 3rd, which ended up going to Trump in 2024 in a massive shock. But we'll get to that later. These 2 districts, I think, are going likely Democratic. They have pretty strong incumbents. For Nevada's 3rd, though, I think it is lean Democratic. It was only lean Democratic in 2024, and Trump managed to win the district because of Latino shifts. And I do think Latinos are going to be a bit better for Democrats in 2026 because a lot of them are going to turn out a lot less because, you know, lower propensity demographic. But I do think that it is just enough to get the district to lean, and because you have Joe Lombardo at the top of the ticket, who's looking like he's going to win re-election by a very strong margin come 2026. And I do think all of that combined makes it so that Susie Lee barely wins by a bit less than 5, around like D+4. Now for Utah, it's looking like there's going to be a redraw here, with a safe Democratic district being created around the Salt Lake City area. And yeah, it's going to be safety. So that is another flip, I guess you could call it, although it's, it's a redraw, so it doesn't really count, but it does add to it. Now we finally hit the West Coast, starting off with Washington's 3rd. This is a district that flipped in a shocker in 2022, and it's been trending to the left more and more consistently. It is represented by Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, who won by a very strong margin in 2024, and I think she wins by a pretty similar margin come 2026, because she won't be facing Joe Kens again probably, and that makes it so that she won't be going against a much weaker candidate. But I do think it will be a much bluer year in Washington in 2026. So I think it all evens out to around a similar performance to 2024, around a D+3 to D+4 win. And moving over to Oregon's 5th, it is held by Michelle Bynum, who won the district against Lori Chavez DeRemer in 2024. She actually only won with 47% of the vote in 2024, which was the lowest percentage for a candidate that won. But, all in all, it's a Harris +8 district. I think she's going to win re-election, especially because it's looking like a much bluer year than the environment that it was in 2024 in Oregon, and especially 2022 when it originally went red. So I do think she wins re-election by a pretty strong margin of around 7 to 8 points. Especially because it looks like Lori Chavez DeRemer, can't run because she's going to be the Secretary of Labor. And we have reached California. Starting off with California's 3rd. This is an area that, contrary to what you might think for like this area, which is pretty kind of close to the Central Valley, which is trending to the right a lot. This area, like the district that borders Nevada, is actually trending to the left quite a bit. It did swing Republican in 2024, but that's not just because of the national environment. Overall, I do think it is trending Democratic a little bit, but there is still a very, very, very strong Republican incumbent in it. His name is Kevin Kiley, he won by 11 in 2024, whereas Trump only won the district by 3. So I do think he's going to win re-election by a pretty strong margin anyway, of around like 9 to maybe 8 points. Now moving on to the actual Central Valley, starting off with Josh Harder in California's 9th. This is actually a Trump +1 district, which was like a massive shock. The Central Valley is very like Latino heavy, and that is the large reason why it swung to the right very fast in 2024. And Josh Harder is the incumbent Democrat who managed to hold on by a lean margin in 2024, and I think he barely wins re-election by like a bit more than 5 come 2026, just because although Latinos are trending to the right faster, I do think he manages to kind of stave that off for 2026, because Latinos are a lower propensity voting bloc, so he can kind of like keep that away for a midterm election. And now moving on to California's 13th. This is kind of a similar situation with Adam Gray. He managed to flip the district in 2024 against John Duarte, who was a pretty mid-Republican incumbent. And this is actually a Trump +5 district, but he has run on kind of like a blue dog platform, and that's made him more popular, and it's the reason he managed to barely beat John Duarte. And I think he barely manages to hold on here by around like D+1, maybe like D+1.5, because his opponent, although he will be the incumbent and it will be a bluer year, his opponent is looking like Javier Lopez, who is the mayor of Ceres, who is looking like a pretty good candidate. Now moving on to California's 21st. This is a Harris +4 district. The incumbent is Jim Costa. I think he wins re-election by a bit more than 5. And that puts Democrats at 218 seats, which means I think they flip the House of Representatives in 2026. But we're not done. We have 8 seats left, so let's keep on going. And now for California's 22nd, this is represented by David Valadao. And this is the final part of the Central Valley we're going to be discussing. Like I said, it's very Latino heavy. This was like, I think, a Biden plus double-digit district, which became a Trump +6 district. And David Valadao is a very good incumbent. He is very moderate. He managed to win re-election by a very strong margin in 2024, although it was against a pretty weak candidate in Rudy Salas. But it looks like there is a different Democratic frontrunner now with Randy Villegas, although it could be Rudy Salas again. If so, it's back to like Liar. But I do think it goes down to lean just because you have a better Democratic nominee and because it is a midterm year. Now moving on to California's 27th. That is not California's 27th. This is California's 27th. It is represented by George Whitesides, who flipped the district against Mike Garcia in 2024. Now, this is a pretty white and affluent and like suburban district, which makes it better for Democrats in a midterm environment. And it is already a Harris district, but it is trending to the right just a little bit each year. But all in all, George Whitesides is a pretty good fit for this district, and I think he will win re-election by a bit more than 5, maybe like 5 or 6, maybe even 7. And now moving on to California's 40th. This is held by Young Kim, who won by I think 10 in 2024, which was a crazy overperformance because it is only a Trump plus 2 district. So she's a great candidate. She fits the district a lot. This is a very Vietnamese heavy area. A lot of Democrats have kind of jumped into the race, but I do think while this could be kind of a strong offensive opportunity for Democrats, possibly if there's a big blue wave, kind of Montana's first or something like that, I do think for now it stays at likely Republican and is around R plus 7, maybe R plus 8. Now moving on to California's 41st. This is represented by Ken Calvert, who has been the Republican incumbent for a very, very, very long time here. He actually underperformed Trump by 3 in 2024. He won by 6, and Calvert only won by 3. A ton of Democrats have declared, and the very strong Democratic nominee from 2024 and 2022 has actually said no to running. And since Calvert is a mid performer, and because this is a more educated and more suburban area, and because of that it'll be better for Democrats, I do think it is barely tilt Democratic, although it very much depends on who Democrats nominate. But this is a flip for Democrats, putting them at 220 seats. But we still have a few more seats to hit. So now moving on to California's 45th. This is a Harris plus 5 district, and it is represented by Derek Tran, who won in a shocker in 2024. The Republican incumbent before him was Michelle Steele, who might run. It seems like she filed paperwork for it, but she might run. If she does, maybe she gives him a run for his money. But I do think he is a pretty good fit for the district. And since it's already a Harris plus 5 district, I think he wins re-election by a pretty similar margin of around 5 points. Now moving to California's 47th. This is a Harris plus 4 district. And Dave Min won this district by around 3 in 2024. This is Katie Porter's old district. And although he underperformed in 2024, I do think he does better in 2026 and wins by a likely margin. And finally, for California's 49th, this is represented by Mike Levin. It is a Harris plus 7 district. He put up a very weak performance in 2024, but I do think much like David Min, he does better come 2026 and wins by a likely margin. And the final district on the map is Alaska at large. It is represented by Nick Begich. And Alaska is very weird. He beat Mary Peltola by 3 in 2024. And it looks like Mary Peltola is actually going to go for governor come 2026. So I do think he does better here by actually quite a bit and wins by a likely margin. But, things could change. She could run for the seat. And if she does, maybe it goes down to lean or even tilt. But, since she's no longer the incumbent, that could make things a lot harder for her here. So I don't think she really tries for it and instead goes for governor. But if he is going against someone else, it could be someone really good. You never know. Alaskan politics are always super weird. But I do think for now he wins re-election by around 7 to maybe 6 points. And that leaves us with a map with Democrats at 223 seats and Republicans at 212. That means Democrats netted 8 seats come 2026. So that is my final prediction. Thank you guys so much for watching. And coming pretty soon will be my governor prediction. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Let me know if you guys agree or disagree with this in the comments. And it's good to be back. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.